Evening, everybody. Nice crowd already here. There'll always be those who come a little bit later. Good. Here's another one on. Thank you. Um, it's an important question to ask, hiding your Jewishness, denying your Jewishness. Unfortunately, we live in a society where there are elements out there that hate us, and you want to feel safe. And the question is, can you take your yarmulke off if you're a man? Can you wear a cap, a baseball cap? What about if you're a woman and you've got a chai necklace or a Magen David or a gar with a chai necklace? Are you allowed to hide it down your top to deny your Jewishness for a few minutes so you can get a good deal at Access Park or wherever you plan to do your shopping? It's a real thing. So if someone was to ask me this question, I can't answer the question myself. I would need to go back to the Gemaras and the sources and see what they said about it. And other great rabbis in the past obviously have dealt with this question, who are much cleverer than me and lived a good 1,500 years ago. And you'll see they deal with it. And what makes it really interesting is when they all argue with each other and no one agrees. But that's not news to us. That's exciting for us. I must tell you, I met with a person who's converting or planning to convert, and the reason I came up with the Shia is because she told me that she was on a fact-finding mission for a certain TV program here in South Africa, and on one of her border crossings, in one of these hostile to Jews areas, they said to her, "Are you a Jew?" And she looked them straight in the face. She wasn't a Jew at the time. And she looked them straight in the eye and she said, "What difference does it make?" And and put them on their back foot. And, this was her way. And I was like, wow, that's brave. I wonder what I would do in that situation. I'd love to be all uh, um, patriotic and say, "Yeah, of course, I'm so proud to be a Jew." But the truth is, I wear a cap. I wear a baseball cap because I don't want to stand out. So what do we do? Halachically, what does Hashem want us to do? And the way to find out what Hashem wants us to do is we look in the Torah. And if the Torah doesn't talk about it, we look in the oral law, the Mishnah, the Midrash, the Gemara. And guess what? There's a Midrash. This is what the Midrash says. Now, the Midrash was written around the year 200, 300, around then. The great rabbis that wrote it also appear in the Gemara and the Mishnah. So it's contemporaneous with that era of Judaism. And it tells us the story of Rabbi Joshua. He had two students that it was during a time of great persecution of the Jewish people by the Romans, and they changed the way they wore their shawl. So, what we call a tallis, but it wasn't a prayer shawl, it was just a shawl that men and women wore. And it says that they changed atifatam, the way they wrapped it. So I guess Jews wrapped their tallis in one way, their shawl in one way that made them look obviously Jewish. And then when they were in a place that they felt was there was a lot of hostility, they wrapped themselves differently to look more Arabic, I guess. Doesn't really go into detail, but the important point of this midrash is that they disguised their Jewishness, exactly what we're talking about. And a Roman officer approached them, seeing that they were Jews, and he knew they were Jews because he used to be a Jew, and he was Geshmad. Geshmad means a Jew who gives up his Judaism, even though there's no such thing. Once you're a Jew, you're always a Jew. We say, we believe. But he believed that he was a Roman officer, and he said to them, "I challenge you to be Moiser Nefesh. You should have given up your life if you are loyal to God and loyal to your Torah." All right, so let me just explain this to you. There's a concept called pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh, as everyone knows, is that you don't give up your life to keep a mitzvah, because the Torah says v'chai bahem. that the Torah is given in order to preserve and prolong life. That's why we use Torah. Torah is our guidebook. Torah is our instruction manual. Torah is there to give us, hopefully, a better, sweeter, a longer life. So the Torah doesn't want you to die because of the Torah. So, for example, if someone is ill on Shabbat and they need to break Shabbat, they're allowed to break Shabbat. If someone is ill and the only thing that will fix him is a cheeseburger, he's allowed to eat a cheeseburger because of pikuach nefesh. You're allowed to break the Torah in order to preserve life. However, there are three exceptions. The three exceptions where a person is meant to give up their life and not what's the name? The Torah. What's the word? And go against the Torah is idolatry, adultery, and murder. So if someone says, kill him or I'll kill you, then a person gives up their life, or for adultery purposes as well, and also for idolatrous practices. So if someone says, bow down to that idol or I will kill you, then you should give up your life in such a situation. So this Roman pre-Jew, post-Jew, whatever you want to call him, he is telling these two rabbis, you should have given up your life rather. You should have put yourself in that situation. Why did you change your dress, your mode of dress? And their answer was, yes, we would die for God, but we don't have to commit suicide. We don't have to put ourselves in a dangerous situation in order to invite death, right? We are allowed to put ourselves in a situation of protection. The only time this comes into play is if someone faces you and says, either bow down to my idol or I'll kill you. So then a person has to lose their life. But you don't have to put yourself in that situation to be killed. That's akin to committing suicide, which you don't have to do. And therefore, these two rabbis explained that to this Roman ex-Jew, they explained to him that therefore they didn't have to give up their lives, and they were allowed to hide their Jewishness with the changing of the method of their wearing of their scarf. Great. So there we have it. 1,500 years ago, we have a midrash that tells us that story. It all seems quite good. The problem is there's a Gemara. The Gemara says, and this is a Gemara in Sanhedrin, and the Gemara, as I said to you, was written around the same time as the Midrash. And the Gemara says that at a time of persecution of Jewish people, you're not even allowed to change your shoelaces. So let me give you a little bit of context over here. Apparently, in those days, 1,500 years ago, a Jew wore black shoelaces and a non-Jew wore red shoelaces. And you weren't allowed to change your shoelaces in a time of persecution to look like a non-Jew. So something that is so minor, even changing your shoelaces, a person should rather wear the dangerous black shoelaces and put his life in danger. But we've just learned from a midrash that you don't have to do that. So that's what we call a stira, a contradiction, a major problem in halacha. And what do we do? The case of the midrash is that no one was forcing anybody, so there was no decree to change your clothing. But in the Gemara, there was a decree. The decree was that you would have to give up your life for shoelaces. Right. So what do we do? What do we do when we have two sources that we're trying to prove a point and they both contradict each other? What do we do with that to answer this seminal question as to, are you allowed to hide your Jewishness? It seems like from the Midrash, you are allowed to, and it seems from the Gemara that you're not allowed to. Just going back to that Midrash, when those two rabbis said, we don't have to flaunt our Jewishness. So that's a very good point. We see it in the Torah, actually, going back 3,300 years. When Jacob sent his 10 sons to go find food in Egypt, he told them a very important rule in Judaism, and that is lama titra'u. Don't be conspicuous. And that's it. And how did he instruct them? Apparently, to get into Egypt was a big city, covered in, surrounded with a wall, and they had many entrances. And he said to these boys, don't all go through the one gate at the same time, all 10 of you. Rather stagger it. One of you go through this gate, another through another gate, one through the south, one through the north, one through the east, etc. And Joseph actually uses that against the brothers. And he says to the brothers, you must be spies, because if you weren't spies, you would have all come through the one gate at the same time. But Jacob, the father, already told him to go through separate gates because of this word, lama titra'u, don't be conspicuous. And that's a very important thing. That's a very important thing in Judaism. Don't be conspicuous. You don't need to stick out like a sore thumb. And therefore, I have no problem hiding my yarmulke and tucking in my tzitzis and hiding your chai necklace, etc., etc. I don't want to be conspicuous. So that's great. However, we have that other Gemara, and it says in a time of persecution of Jews, I don't think we're in that. In Hebrew, it's called a sha'at hashmad. In a time of persecution, even the tiniest change is a chilul Hashem, is a desecration of God. Even changing your shoelaces, one should rather give up their lives than change their shoelaces. So what do we do when we have two Gemaras, a Midrash and a Gemara, arguing with each other? Very easy. We go and look for a third Gemara. Great. So let's find a third Gemara. Here's a Gemara. All right, you ready? It also needs a lot of pre-knowledge. There's a prohibition of wearing shatnez. Shatnez is the mixture of wool and linen. And of course, the rabbis argue exactly what does it mean to mix wool and linen. Is it merely tying the knots? They say that the Hugo Boss, they made suits. They made the SS uniform in World War II. They made the Nazi uniform. And it's funny that today, if you buy a Hugo Boss suit, as opposed to a Woolworths suits do not have a mixture of wool and linen. But of course, a Hugo Boss suit, Nazis, they do have wool and linen mixed. So whereas the suit is 100% wool, beautiful, but apparently the collar stiffener is made up of linen, and it's embedded in the suit. So there's a mixture of wool and linen together. Or if you have a wool suit and the buttons are sewn on with linen thread, because linen is much stronger than wool, and you would want the buttons to be solid. So that is considered a mixture of wool and linen. Okay. There was a time, says the Gemara. Now we're back to a Gemara. This is the third Gemara that we're going to discuss. There was a time that, I don't know what the context was exactly, but you were charged tax. If you were a Jew and you were carrying a certain amount of garments, you were charged per garment. So the question the Gemara asks is, would you be allowed to put all the garments on top of each other and wear all of them, so that when you come to the duties at the airport, at the port, you can say, I'm not carrying any garments with me, because you're wearing all of them, so you don't have to pay tax on any of them. The problem is, what if one of the garments is wool, and on top of that you put a garment of linen, and now you are wearing wool and linen mixed together? Are you allowed to do that? So the one rabbi says, again, another argument. Well, what would Judaism be if we all just agreed on everything? One rabbi says you're not allowed to. But Rabbi Akiva, the famous Rabbi Akiva, said, yes, you are allowed to do that. You are allowed to, in order to avoid the special Jew tax, because they are targeting you as a Jew, you would be allowed to wear all your clothes at the same time in order to hide it from the meches. Meches is even used in modern day Hebrew, from the tax collectors who were targeting Jews. And it's not even so far-fetched. There are conspiracy theories out there that there's an evil element in SARS that's tracking Yidden, looking at their surnames and pulling up all their bank accounts and targeting them based on their surnames. So that's it could be just a conspiracy, but it fits nicely into everything that we've been going through as Jewish people. There's the silent anti-Semitism, and then there's the flagrant, anti-Semitism. But nevertheless, this has been a problem. This Gemara was written 1,500 years ago, and Jews were trying to avoid taxation by wearing all their clothing at the same time. So as much as things change, they actually stay the same. Anyway, so we have these three Gemaras, and what comes out though, out of all of them, is the following: that you have to, with a very fine tooth comb, and you need a very rabbinic mind and a very halachic mind. And what comes out is, if you do something in a way that can be misconstrued as though you are not Jewish, then it's fine. Then it's fine. You don't have to put your life in danger. You don't have to be conspicuous. You can wear a baseball cap when you go to the Dubai airport or to Saudi Arabia to do business, or whatever your situation may be. There's nothing wrong with tucking in your tzitzit, hiding your Magen David, putting on a baseball cap. Even though a guy with a suit and a baseball cap there's nothing that shouts louder than "I am a Jew." A guy in a suit, a tie, and a baseball cap, because a baseball cap goes with jeans and a t-shirt. So yeah, you have this guy in the airport with a tie and a suit, a Hugo Boss suit, let me tell you, that has been checked for shutness. There's no wool and linen. They removed the linen and they put denim in the collar stiffener. I'm telling you, the Yidden that do that, if you can afford a Hugo Boss suit, gay gesundheit, go ahead. So, but he's wearing a baseball cap. It's funny, there are these baseball cap manufacturers in Jerusalem, in Meir Sharim, actually, that you can buy one. I don't know if you'll catch this joke, but this guy, they made one for a guy, and it said there, "My other hat is a Borsellino." So I need to give you context. Even for the jokes that I tell you, I need to give you context. A Borsellino is those like a rabbi's hats, the Stetson. It's made by an Italian company called Borsellino. Their biggest customer are the Yidden, or the Haredi Jews in Israel, in Jerusalem, etc., who buy up the majority of their hats. I mean, who else wears hats today? So Borsellino in Italy is making all its money from the Frum Jews and they're very expensive. They're about 5,000 Rand and up for the cheapest one, 5,000 Rand. So you can buy a baseball cap that says, "My other hat is a Borsellino." But nevertheless, that's exactly what you're wearing. You're walking around Saudi Arabia with this baseball cap on because you're trying to hide your Jewishness. And the truth is, you're allowed to. You're allowed to. Based on the Gemara about the taxation, based on the Gemara about the two students of Rabbi Joshua and the Roman, we learn from those two. Again, we don't thumb suck anything in Judaism. We need sources from previous greater rabbis than ourselves who dealt and delved into these cases, and therefore a person can hide their Jewishness in that backhanded way. However, if someone asks you point blank, "Are you a Jew?" you're not allowed to say no, because that is tantamount to denying Hashem. And that is tantamount to idol worship. And even if it would cost you your life, remember, idol worship is the one thing that a person has to give up their life for. Not for kashrut, not for Shabbat, not for anything else, but for idol worship, yes. So the question is, by saying, "No, I am not a Jew," by denying God, is akin to atheism, to idolatry, and a person would have to rather give up their life. And this is how the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, now we are in the 1500s. We've gone from the year 500. We've actually gone from 3,300 years ago, the time the Torah was given, from Jacob, 4,000 years ago. Then we went to the Midrash and the Gemara, which was 1,500 years ago. Now we are about 500 years ago. We had the Shulchan Aruch. He was born as the Jews were being expelled from Spain, so it's easy to remember his date of birth, 1492. And he wrote it, Rabbi Joseph Caro. And he wrote down in Shulchan Aruch, if you want to check the source, it's Yoredeah, chapter 157, and he says you're not allowed to say, "I don't believe in God," or "I am a Christian," or anything like that, because that is tantamount to denying Hashem, idolatry. It's Chilul Hashem, desecrating Hashem's name, and a person would have to give up their life even in that situation. So What do we do? How do we get around this in a kosher way? Are there any loopholes? Because as I told you, this girl told me she went somewhere and they said to her, "Are you a Jew?" And she said, "What difference does it make?" And I wonder if someone asked me that question, how would I deal with it? So I'll tell you. There are Rishonim. The Rishonim lived from the year 1000 till the 1500s. This predates the Shulchan Aruch. And they say that a person is allowed to say something that can be misconstrued, and if the attacker makes a mistake by himself, then that's his problem. So let me give you context over here. Iran, before it became a Shiite Muslim country, was a Persian country. When the Shah was there and the citizens were happy and they were going to the beach in bikinis and not in burqas, what religion were they? They weren't Muslim. So a lot of Persians were Zoroastrian. So I'll tell you something interesting about Zoroastrians, and the only reason I know this is because the Gemara, which was in Iraq, Babylon, and Persia, Iran, the Gemara dealt with Zoroastrians. They were persecuting the Jewish people 1500 years ago. So the Zoroastrians believe in a duality. They believe in a God of goodness and a God of evil. They believe in a God of light and a God of darkness. To the point where every Friday night, there's some shuls that talk about what you're allowed to light on Friday night and what you're not allowed to light on Friday night. And there were specific times of year where it was the God of darkness and who reigned supreme. And there were times in the year when the God of light, the God of fire would reign supreme. And depending on what time of year it was, you had to toe the line. Otherwise, you could be arrested or go to jail. Now, as you know, the Jews in Babylon keep the Torah. And the Jews in Babylon, it's Friday night, have to light their Shabbos candles. But it's the time of year for the God of darkness. And you're not allowed candles in your house. So the Gemara deals with, are you allowed to take out the candle on Shabbat? You're not allowed to extinguish the flame on Shabbat. But there's a problem. You could be in big trouble. It could be life-threatening to have the fire going on Shabbat. So would you be allowed to extinguish it? So that's the context over here. So a policeman, a Zoroastrian policeman, came up to a Jew and said to him, "Are you a Jew?" And he answered and he said, "I am a servant of fire." And the Zoroastrian was very happy because he thought that he was a Zoroastrian, because he answered the question beautifully. And it was obviously the time of the light God, not the dark God. And he got out of there by the what's it called? The skin of his teeth. Thank you. He got out of there by the skin of his teeth. Now I ask you a question. How can you say that? Isn't he denying Hashem? Isn't he worshiping idols? He's worshiping the God of fire. You know what the answer is? Says the Namukah Yosef, who was one of these rabbis who lived 1,000 years ago. Hashem in the Torah is called an Eish Oichlo. God is called a consuming fire. So what his intention was, this Jew, he was saying, I am a servant of the God of fire. I'm a servant of the fire. I'm a servant of the devouring fire, which the Torah describes God as. And therefore, he wasn't denying Hashem. The fact that the Zoroastrian misinterpreted his meaning and that he was causing a false impression, that's not his problem. And you're allowed to cause a false impression if your life is at danger. You're not allowed to cause a false impression the rest of the time. That's called genevat da'at, which literally means you stealing someone's knowledge. Let me tell you, I'll digress because I like this example. Let me tell you how bad genevat da'at is, stealing someone's mind, stealing someone's knowledge. Classically, people think it means that you're stealing someone's intellectual property. It does mean that as well. But a classic example brought by the Gemara 1,500 years ago is if you know that someone has been invited out for Shabbat and you've just heard via that he's going to the Cohens for Shabbos. And now you know he's going to the Cohens and you go up to him and you say, good Shabbos, would you like to come to us for lunch? And you know that he's going to the Cohens. The only reason you did that was to curry favor with him. That's called Genevas das. That's called stealing someone's mind, because now you have misled the person to think that you like them when you really don't like them, and you're using that as an opportunity. So there you're not allowed to do that. However, in a situation where your life is in danger, you can't say you believe in Zoroastrianism, because that's idolatry and that a person has to give up their life for. But to say I believe in the God of fire and let the Zoroastrian non-Jew make the mistake and get a false impression, that's not your problem. That's not your problem. So, so again, a person would not be allowed to wear a cross, because that's blatant denial of Hashem. But a person would be allowed to wear a burqa, or wrap their head in a turban, or something like that. That's fine, because a turban doesn't represent a specific religion. A burqa doesn't represent a specific religion. A tselem, or a clerical collar, does represent. So that they wouldn't be allowed, to do. But a person could use something in order to give a false impression, in order to save themselves from danger. And I'll just end off with a story that before the war, there was a great rabbi called Rabbi Menashe Klein, and he got papers indicating that the family were non-Jewish. And he never had to use them, but he got to, I don't know, America or wherever, and he got out of the terrible tragedy of Europe and the Holocaust. And he finally, when everything calmed down and settled down, he looked at these papers and he saw that he had blatantly written that he's a non-Jew. And he wanted to know if he had to do teshuvah, and if he had, there's a whole process of teshuvah for someone who's denied Hashem and then wants to come back and wants to re-accept Hashem in his life, and he didn't know what to do. But the answer obviously was, it was no problem. He did nothing wrong. He never said the words. It was just printed on the documents. And of course, it was a mitzvah in World War II to save as many Jewish lives as possible. And the Torah also says, "V'nishmartem me'od lenafshotechem," you have to do everything you can in order to keep yourself alive. And I just want to end with a story in Buchenwald. When the liberators came to Buchenwald, the last few Nazi guards tried to round up as many Jews as they could, to kill as many as they could before the liberators came. I don't know if the liberators were Russian or American, but they were right there. They were on their way. So the SS were trying to kill as many Jews as they could. The problem was Buchenwald also had many other prisoners, not only Jewish prisoners. And so they were going around and asking the various Jews. So they went up to this one rabbi. And I must tell you, there were many Hasidic rabbis who shaved off their beards and cut off their payas in order not to look too conspicuous, even around that time. And obviously, halachically, that was perfectly fine. But anyway, back to the story. So the SS was rounding up all these prisoners and asking each one of them, "Are you a Jew?" And the one rabbi answered, "Kein Jude," which in German means not Jewish. So he asked him point blank, "Are you a Jew?" And he said, "Kein Jude." I guess it's very similar to the Yiddish, if you know a bit of Yiddish, which I don't. But when you don't want to give someone an ayin hora, you say keinen hora, keinen hora, which is, there should not be an ayin hora. So he said, "Kein Jude," no, I'm not Jewish. But in his mind, he was thinking of the Hebrew word ken Jude, I am a Jew. But the fact that the SS made a mistake and thought he said kein when he really said ken, no harm done, according to Hashem and according to his Torah. So you got to be a little bit creative. I think that's what comes out of this shiur. You've got to be creative. And a person doesn't have to put his life in danger by being conspicuous. And a person is allowed to be, as I said, creative and try and find a way, if he feels that he's going to be in danger, to try and find a way to dodge the question. But he can't do anything blatant like wear a cross or actually say the words, I believe in Jesus or something like that, because that would be tantamount to idolatry for a Jew, and therefore he wouldn't be allowed to do that. Also, an interesting thing about changing clothing and wearing a burqa, this also came up before when I've given the share in the past, and that's interesting that the Jews in Egypt were saved and were ready for redemption because of three things. They never changed their language, they never changed their names, and they never changed their clothing, their dress. And people ask, but what about today? I'm speaking to you in English. My name is Ryan, and I'm wearing clothing that aren't specifically Jewish clothing. So how come we don't have to keep those laws anymore? We all change our name. We have English names, most of us. We speak English. But didn't the Jews or the Israelites in Egypt, wasn't these three things the things that kept their Jewishness? So the answer is that it was only a mitzvah in Egypt when they had no other mitzvahs. They only had these three mitzvahs to keep them Jewish. But now we have 613 mitzvahs. So those three have fallen away and they don't make up part of the 613 mitzvahs. In fact, do you know how the Jewish people left Egypt? They wore Egyptian clothing that they had taken from the Egyptians as part payment for the 400 years of suffering. They wore Egyptian clothing to leave it. And in fact, when Moses is met by the daughters of Yitro, they say to their father when he asks them, how did you get here so quickly today? Didn't you get harassed by the shepherds? And they say, no, a very kind Egyptian man saved us. Hello, we're talking about Moses. Why are they saying he was an Egyptian man? And the obvious answer is because he looked like an Egyptian man. He dressed like an Egyptian man. So if Moses can do it, you can wear your Hugo Boss suit, just get checked for shutness, and everything is hunky-dory. But it's just interesting that, talking about the shoelace decree and that Jews had a special type of clothing and non-Jews had a special type of clothing. So that doesn't apply today, so long as the clothing are decent and smart and sneers and modest. So then a person can wear anything and have any hairstyle, etc., etc. Those laws don't apply as they used to when the Jewish people were in Egypt at that time, which was the only thing they had to hold on to. But today we have 600 Kaina Nahora. We have 613 mitzvahs that we've got, and that's our guidebook, and that's the thing that's going to keep us through life, this very complicated, difficult existence that we all have. The Torah is our instruction manual, and it helps us through it. And then when you have interesting questions like this, you need to go through the various evolution of Torah through the ages, and whether you realize it or not, what I did was I took you on a little journey from Yaakov 4,000 years ago to Moses 3,300 years ago, to the Gemara 1,500 years ago, to the Midrash 1,800 years ago. I took you then to the Shulchan Aruch 500 years ago. I then took you to the various classical commentators called the Rishonim 1,000 years ago. And then I took you all the way to about 80, 90 years ago to pre-Holocaust or during the Holocaust or liberation of the Holocaust. And there you see the evolution of halacha. And that's how a learned rabbi, and this isn't my stuff, this I got from Rabbi Friend, just in case I don't want to do Genevas Das and make you think, misrepresent myself that I'm so clever. I'm not. This is all Rabbi Friend. He's a great rabbi in Baltimore, in Maryland, in America, and he gives these unbelievable, very deep halachic shiurim. And this, of course, I plagiarized from him, but I'll tell you his name. And it's his genius in Torah that put this all together. And I'm just really good at parroting and giving it over. I hope it makes sense. But I just want to show you the evolution. I want to show you the way you can study Torah and go through the various ages and the books and try and put together an answer to a question as complicated as, can you hide your Jewishness or not? And in conclusion, you can, but you can't do it overtly. You have to do it covertly. You have to be clever and creative about it, and you don't need to put yourself out there. You don't need to be conspicuous. So shkayach to all of you. Thank you so much for listening. There will be a recording, and Gavin will post it in due course. I wish you all a very good night. Laila Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi, from Ruth. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth.